Hey, this is Notser, and I've got a question for you. Are you okay with a battleship line focusing predominantly on using HE as an ammo type? I'm wrestling with this same question. I knew their HE was great, but I was existing in a world with a standard meta. We had 4 or 5 battleships per side, 3 to 4 cruisers, 2 or 3 destroyers, and maybe a token aircraft carrier, right? That was what the normal game type was when I was testing it. But now in the queue that we exist in, with predominantly British battleships take a lot of damage from HE. They've got a soft outer layer. Their HE shell itself is the best in the game. Some people might not like that. Oh, they just introduced a gimmick. That's not actually true, because through the research, apparently the British battleships had pretty good HE. And if you stop and think about it, this has to be the line that they do HE on. It is by far the most impressive HE shells that I've been seeing. They had some number where the Iowa had, I think, like 80 kilogram shells versus the Orion that had 90 kilogram shells. I mean, that's ridiculous. The Iowa is late World War II. The Orion is World War I, basically. And for there to be that kind of discrepancy, that's really, really large. So I could absolutely agree with the idea, maybe not the implementation, but the idea that the British battleships would indeed focus on HE. Do they need to have the highest damage per shot, the highest percentage fires per shell? You know, all this stuff, high rate of fire too. All this coupled together, their rate of fire is basically perfect to set a fire. They don't have to actually worry about holding their fire because they won't be reloaded before the damage control has fallen off the target and then fire again. The entire thing works very well together. And maybe it works a little too well together. We'll have to see when there's something other than British battleships to fire at exclusively. And I've seen very successful games in the Conqueror, and the Conqueror's just letting it go. I would love to see some stats on the amount of shells fired when you are considering your shot versus just firing HE. Does the consideration of firing AP versus HE cripple your damage output so much that it's irrelevant to decide what ammo type to use and just use HE? These are things that I really want to research and explore. I'm not someone who is completely against the idea that a ship would do something outside of the norm. You look at the Soviet destroyers, they're basically light cruisers, right? They are not what I would consider a destroyer. A destroyer is an objective controller, long-range torpedoes so they can actually attack without being seen, and then maybe they'll have token guns to fire at the target. They're not actually serious damage output, though. But then here is the Soviet destroyers, and the Soviet destroyers are flipped out on 180. Their torpedoes are awful, but they've got great speed, and their guns are fantastic. Now, the Hobodovsk is probably one of the most annoying ships to play against in the existence of World of Warships. Part of that is because they can just fire their guns, fire HE, and avoid every single shell towards them. If they play it correctly, they should basically take 0 damage. And there's no counterplay to that. You have to kill people who are using HE, basically. Is there enough counterplay against the British battleships that it's not as overbearing as something like the Hobodovsk can feel? I think there probably is enough counterplay, just because they're large, they're very easy to hit, and they have low health pools in general. They've got the soft outer layer. You know, just because you don't have the British HE doesn't mean you can't exploit the fact that, hey, someone set them on fire, I should probably put that fire out. I almost would like it if Wargaming would have a different animation for when damage control is used to put the fire out versus when the fire goes out on its own through the, like like a like there's like you just see, I don't know how they would communicate. It's just like it's a giant fire extinguisher. Just something so a player base can be more intelligent. I know I'm asking for a lot of random things, but just hear me out. If you can exploit the fact that your teammates are setting fires, it's going to help you out. Setting fires, setting floods on targets helps your teammates out. I wish I could set more fires and floods with my aircraft carriers, for instance. I've got the worst luck in the game, it feels like, when it comes to dotting, though. But I don't know that that's bad. You know, I've seen numbers that I've got a couple really great players. And firing predominantly HE and having consistently 100 to 150,000 damage. Granted, they only have probably 1, maybe 2 kills. That feels pretty good. You're contributing to the team. Now, you're not contributing a lot of burst damage that actually kills targets because most of your targets are probably battleships. So they're just taking damage slowly, but you're still getting a ton of damage. And that feels good as a player. It doesn't feel good to keep burning, but I don't know. I don't know if the game is too far, if this is not acceptable. If there's more cruisers in the queue, you will want to use AP because of the one-shot potential. That's just the nature of the beast. Sorry, cruisers, you guys are just so squishy that firing AP at you is absolutely what you need to do. I think, honestly, I'm cool with it as long as the queue gets far, far away from the amount. The amount is really what is overbearing about it. Just playing against the same ship, 10 targets all being the same, it's not fun. It wasn't fun with the Germans, but I will say with the Germans, the unfun part of it definitely came online as they scaled up. What are you going to gain as a British? You're going to get better concealment, right? But your identity isn't locked in to your commander. Not like the Germans. The Germans were absolutely locked into having a skilled commander. You could only taste the potential early on as the Germans, whereas with the Brits, their armament is basically all there. The only thing they're going to gain is defensive capability. They're going to take the most damage they can right now up front because everyone has unskilled commanders. But they're going to dish the most they can because all their targets are, again, don't have any concealment and they have a very soft outer layer. So it's a weird world. I think as I discuss this, you know, I see the Soviet destroyers. They're not really a DD, but they exist in the game. Do I find them offensive at times? Only 1 or 2, but their style is just different. You know, if the British battleships, if their AP did the most per shot and their HE was the most per shot, then I would probably feel like they need to just have the same health as a cruiser. And they would still probably live way longer than cruisers. I have talked and I was like, you know what, I think at some point they're just going to lower the damage of HE slightly. It all depends on how effective it actually is. People can say, oh, it feels so broken, I'm getting so much damage. Yeah, sure. You know what feels broken? Getting 2 or 3 citadels on a handful of cruisers and they're all wiped out and I do like 200,000. And knowing that they couldn't angle at all against it, it was all on me to hit the target. There's definitely a lot of parts of the game where it's like, yeah. Or when I send a torpedo spread and, like in my aircraft carrier, I'm loving my tier 9 aircraft carrier. It is fabulous. I'm doing so much damage to the enemy. My Japanese aircraft carrier. There's a lot of things that feel really good to use. So yeah, it's one of those situations where I think we're just in the worst case scenario. When the population gets more manageable, it's going to be less effective to just fire HE only. You would want to switch to AP against a cruiser, for instance. If you had a target that was not a Brit, your HE would probably shatter a little bit more. Maybe if you fire against, well, no, the Germans don't have enough armor. There's some that have heavy armor at the top of their hull. So you would only have to shoot the bow and the stern with your HE or the superstructure. But yeah. I'm very curious to see how all shakes out. I'm sorry about this rambling. I just was really interested to hear your thoughts on the HE situation with the British battleships. Do you feel like it's lowering the skill cap of the battleship line for them to be that effective? I don't know. It's sort of a force multiplier, like I tried to say. When there's a lot of HE being flung, everything's basically on fire. Maybe there needs to be something where you become more resilient to fire as you have fought and put out fires. I don't know. Something like that. So it's... I've got games where... I'm sure you've got games too. You've got games where you set the target on fire. Good. He puts his damage out. Damage control, he puts it out. And then you relight that fire and you get 3, 4, 5. 5? There's only 4 sections. And I'm sure he's just cursing up a storm, right? And it's so easy. So, yeah. I don't know. I don't know what the solution is to make people feel like they have more control over it. Maybe there's a commander skill. When you've fought off enough fires, you just keep fighting the fires even faster and faster and faster. If you're only using damage control on fire, or every fire you use damage control, maybe it makes your damage control come off a cooldown faster. I don't know. Maybe they would incorporate that in the commander skill. It's a lot of weird stuff that I'm talking about. I appreciate you listening. That's the video for today. In the comments, let me know. Are you okay with a battleship line firing predominantly HE? I hope you all have a fantastic day, and I'll catch you next time.